Good. Excellent. So let me talk a little bit briefly to you about tertiary study and what's expected. As I was saying before, having done a master's and a PhD, and before that a bachelor's, I've had a bit of experience at having to put the assignments in and think about it. So I want to share some of that today. And I want to begin by saying that tertiary study is different to high school study, and you're expected to know quite a bit about gathering the information and presenting the information. Perhaps Wes, then Rachel, how do you find this expectation that you are expected to find the information yourself, manage your time? What do you find hard? What do you find easy about having to take responsibility for time management, having to take responsibility for information? So Wes first, and then Rachel.
Initially, as I mentioned earlier, I'm doing this study after a long gap actually. So I've found it a little bit hard when it comes to time management and everything. But somehow I worked it out and did everything in a hard way. That's why, I want to learn some skills from you guys so that I can apply that. And as Anne said, I can do that in less time. If I do that efficiently, that will reduce my effort and time in preparing essays and everything.
Yeah, and certainly that was my experience way back at the beginning. That is, having done high school, I expected that at university I'd be given all of the information. And it was only about second or third year of university that I found in the second and third year suddenly cottoned on that I was meant to do a lot more myself. And one of the things that we do is pre-reading. That is, I found that if I'd read the textbook, if I'd read the readings before the lecture, then I had a knowledge of what was expected. I even found that sometimes the lecturers will let you have information about which textbooks could be used in the subject in the 6 months or month or two beforehand. If you become more familiar with the subject, you can get more out of the subject. So pre-reading can be very useful. In terms of time management, I would draw up a weekly planner, and in my weekly planner, I would know that I have to set aside 3 hours to attend the lecture, and then I've got to set aside another 3 or 4 or more hours to do pre-reading and other reading. And then I would also know that the major way that I'm going to be assessed is through the assessment, and so I would set aside time for doing the assessment as well. And one of the things I often tried to do was to get a few bites of the cherry. If I was doing an assessment, I'd think, can I use this in other ways and various ways? And so if I had to give a talk or do something else, I'd find that I'd have multiple use for the things that I was learning. So I rewarded myself a bit that way. And then I also had a year planner. And then on the year planner, I would write in when the assignment's due, and I would then work back. And so when there was a week before or 2 weeks before, I'd highlight how many weeks to go before the assignment was due. And then I'd try and have work done before I got up to it. And if I was doing more than one assignment, then I would work out which ones were due when. And so I put more effort into the one due sooner, but I put some work into gathering information for the other one, because your assignment's only as good as the information that you gather. Now, each subject has guidelines for your readings and study handbooks. So I'd try and look up the books that were recommended there on the CHC website. I'd also use the lecturers' names for the books and the authors' names for books, and I'd look on the CHC website and Google Scholar and others, and I'd find out other related material that the scholars had written and other related material in the same area. I found also a bit of a shock coming to the contradictions and the different viewpoints. And so I had to work through that and realise that in scholarly study, they like to see different viewpoints, alternate viewpoints. And there is a thought that the greater distance between the different viewpoints, sometimes the stronger the argument is, because you've considered a range of views. However, you have to be careful not to go out into different topic areas. You need to keep focused as much as you can on the one topic. And I found that the smaller and more tightly focused the topic that you were looking at, often the better you could do, because you could really dig deeply into that subject. So I might ask Rachel now, how did you find the transition to tertiary study, time management, and finding all the resources yourself? How did you find that, Rachel?
Yeah, thanks. I haven't studied, like I did some courses through work, but yeah, it was very, they did feed you the information that you need and things like, nothing like tertiary study. I did study a little bit, like quite a while ago. I studied, I think, 18 months of a course before I took a year off, and I never went back. So it's been a while. And it's fitting it in now around the young family and things like that. It's been a bit tricky. I find myself, I'll put time aside to do the readings, but I get bogged down in really like, oh wow, this is really interesting, and then I'll read, when I'm trying to prepare for an assignment, and I just really need to get, references and define my argument, but I just go off on, I get bogged down in lots of detail and finding the resources. I go off the recommended reading list as a starting point, and then I try to do a little bit of searching in the library as well. I'm sure I'll get better at that. But yeah, I found enough for my my assignment, but yeah, can definitely get better at, I guess, skim reading and note taking, because then I'd also get stuck when I'm doing the referencing, because I'd be like, doing the assignment and the referencing, because I hadn't kept good notes about, I knew there was something there, but my notes were a bit unclear where it was from. So yeah.
And that's one of the real difficulties, I think, is we all make that mistake. We write down real gems and we can't find where it came from. Occasionally we can put those gems into Google and find where it came from, but often you don't find it so easily. Yeah, I think it is a challenge, as you say, to manage family and time. And I think it's important to give time to family and then find those other times where you can find the time. For some people, it's early in the morning, others later in the afternoon. I would find that if I got up at, say, 5 o'clock or so in the morning and put in 3 hours before work or other things, that I'd get 5 days times 3 hours. It'd give me 15 hours there. And there's other times in the week where you could find additional time. One of the things I want to really mention today is pre-reading. So if you read before the lecture, they say that you'll get a lot more out of the lecture than if you read after the lecture, because pre-reading gives you some ideas and understandings of the key concepts. So I do encourage you to read before the lectures if you can. If you make notes before the lecture, you won't have to write down so much during the lecture. And now with online, sometimes if you got live online, which you have to really move quickly to take the notes on, and then sometimes you've got recorded online where you can pause it, and so that makes it a little bit easier as well. It's also a good idea to write down questions you're asking, and you might be seeking answers to as you go along. And then you might want to ask clarification of terms, or you could Google it first before you ask the clarification. And then you can scan and take photographs, use your iPhone or your smartphone to take photographs as well. So taking notes during the lectures, a great way of what to do in tertiary education in life is note taking. Even after you finish subjects, often you'll still be required to take notes. And so it's a good idea to note the time, the place, the people, the topic. You want to make your notes accessible, and so put the major ideas and themes there. And then remember, the lecturers spend a lot of years gathering the information. So if you can get some really good gems from your lecturer, that's valuable. Every lecturer is going to be different in the presentation they give. So in one sense, you want to be aware of the lecturer's position and point of view. But if there's some YouTubes or other resources that you can read that show different positions, that can lead to a more well-rounded person. And so that can be useful as well. In a lecture, think about where you sit. Be prepared for taking notes with your notebook or your laptop and back up, so that if you lose those resources, you'll be able to find them again. Review the notes later on, and that'll help you gather more information at a later stage. I'll just go down a bit further. You might be able to record the lecture. You'd have to check with the lecturer, is that okay if I use my iPhone or smartphone to record? It's good too if you can develop critical listening and thinking skills. And so even though the main goal is to gather information, if you can think about the information and ask questions, whose opinion, what support is given, how valid do you think the ideas are and why? And there are things you might disagree with, other things you might want to expand your ideas on. So Wes, what are your thoughts? What works for you when you're gathering information from a lecture or from reading? And then I'll ask Rachel as well. So what works for you?
Yeah, as you said, pre-reading really helps. When I do the pre-reading, I can grasp a lot of information from the lecturer. Yeah, sometimes if I go without pre-reading, really it's difficult for me to understand. And really, the pre-reading really helps. Yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah, and they'll mention a name and a theme, and once they do that, you can really go for it. Like someone might mention Erik Erikson and stages of development. And the moment you've got those couple of clues, you can do a lot of further reading, can't you? Find out about Erik Erikson, who he is, his background, day he was born, and all of that sort of information. And then under stages of development, you can start to look at what he meant by his 8 or so stages of development. And then you'll start to, after a while, begin to realise there's different views on this. Now, your lecturer will probably introduce it, but they'll skim over the surface. They'll just introduce it. In order for you to know that topic more deeply, then if you can find some scholarly material on it, I'd go to Google Scholar and type in Erik Erikson stages of development. I'd go to the online CHC library resources, try and find scholarly resources. Hey, one of the secrets, the harder it is to read and the bigger the words, possibly the better it is. It's a bit like tough meat or something like that. When it's a bit tough, then it stretches you. But then you want some material that's easy to read. And that's no excuse in your assignments to write hard to read. You've got to write well to communicate well. But some reading might challenge you the first time that you read it. Rachel, what's working for you in going to lectures and finding material, pre-reading, taking notes?
Yeah, I lost you too.
Yeah. Oh, we've disconnected. It's unstable.
Oh, there you are, you're back.
Better.
Yeah. Yeah, so Rachel, your thoughts on how well you do with lectures and listening and ways you can improve?
Yeah, I can definitely improve my note taking from the lectures. I'm engaged and I'm listening and reading the study guide. Occasionally I have done the pre-reading. Mostly I find I haven't because I'm catching up on last week's reading.
Yes.
But yeah, it does help when I do it. But yeah, probably just the note taking and yeah, and things to note from my assignments out of it and things like that would be where I need to improve.
Yeah, that's great. So let's go on now to look at the note taking. So the amount of reading you have to do can appear quite daunting, almost impossible, but there are ways that you can quickly skim through, move through more quickly. Now, one of the methods that has been proposed to help you to read more quickly is the SQ4R method. So before you read, if you can do a survey, then you can find just the one chapter out of the 10 or 15 chapters that's really going to be best for you. So you go straight there. And then you look for headings and key terms, and you go there. Now, if you've got time with the textbook to work your way through all of the textbook, that's very, very good. But if you're a bit short of time, then find ways to flip through the chapter, flip through the book, find the material more quickly. You could carry the book with you. You could get an audio version of the book that you listen to as you go to sleep or something. There's different ways that you can try and pick up the information. You might also find that there are videos that you can watch as well. So survey, SQ4R method survey is first thing to speed up the process is to flick through quickly, find the most valuable section that you can. And the same, if you find 5 resources on the subject, quickly whiz through them and start with the one that's most relevant. Second Q for question. Keep in mind the question being asked in your essay, the question being asked by your lecturer. What's the most significant question related to your subject? What's the question that's particularly interesting? So we're interested in very big, important questions. As an example, if you see the heading greenhouse warming, you could ask questions, what is greenhouse warming? Why does it occur? What are the main differences in viewpoint? Why are there differences in viewpoint? So you're looking out for those sorts of questions, who, what, where, when, why, how, and you are then exploring the chapter or the book for those. R1, read. So you skim through quickly and then you spend more time going through the chunkiest, richest information sections that you can, and that you're looking for answers to the questions you posed. R2, reflect. And so you reflect on the material, you take notes, you reflect on your notes, you look at the scholars, you reflect on what the scholars say. And then thirdly, you recite it over, you restate it, you reformulate it, you take it in your own words. I think it's a good idea to have 50-50, 50% other people's information, quotes, direct quotes initially, and later you'll paraphrase them and think about them more. And also 50% start to express your own views as well. And as Christians, we believe that God has given us a place and information. And so it's important to recognise the views that God is giving us, but at the same time, we need to be skillful so that we don't just give our undeveloped views. We need to recognise our views will usually grow and change as we study the subject. R3 is recite, go over it, ask questions, look for answers, and then R4 is to review. So how do you feel that you go, Wes, when you go through the book? You seek to find the information quickly, you summarise it. Are you able to do that reasonably successful? What works for you?
Yeah, that's really that's helping me, the skim reading and this thing. But I have a question with the recite part. 50% from others,
Yeah,
the 50% from my own,
yeah,
my view. I'm struggling there because if I put anything from my own, from maybe what I understood previously, what I learned previously, when I applied those skills, even then I was expected to give a reference for that. I'm struggling in that.
Yeah, and that makes sense because when you've been studying the subject for, say, 3 weeks, so you're an expert with 3 weeks expertise, and then you go to the library and you discover someone's done a PhD on it and they've done 30 years on it, then to have their reference as one of the top 20 scholars in the world, and that's what everyone does. We go to the top 20 out of the world, Albert Einstein on physics and that sort of thing, then it's hard for your 3 weeks of study to measure up against the 30 years. And so I think that's why students tend to mainly go with scholars' writings, and lecturers tend to say, your 3 weeks won't measure up against 30 years. I don't want to hear about your 3 weeks of ideas. I want to hear about what scholars have said from 30 years of incredible study that they've put in. And there's a lot of truth in that. I did some study on megachurches here in Australia. And then I was talking to other people in England where they've put £8 million, $16 million into doing a study and got the best scholars in England to do it. And clearly there will be material that they have found through all that finance, all the best scholars, that's going to be more than I would find from some study I do. But at the same time, this is your work of art that you're writing, this essay. And so we do need your view, not just being a photocopier and reproducing what others do. So I think every essay is original. That is, it's how you engaged at that time with the material. And if you do another essay in 6 months' time and don't rely on swapping or copying any of it over, you'll find it'll be entirely different. And so just like every artwork is original, then every essay you do is going to be original. And I think it should have a bit of yourself in it. That is, you should work with the material that you're working through. And so if you're working, say, greenhouse gases, then you would look at that those ideas on greenhouse gases, etc., and you gather the information. And in some ways, you're not going to get the good material until after you've gathered the information. And so your opinions will make more sense at the end of the gathering process. But in some ways, we really want you to not just photocopy and hand in a photocopy of what one scholar says. We want you to look at, say, 20 scholars, and then you might find that some are saying it's a major problem, others that it's a minor problem, and the economy is important as well, and such forth. So you want a balance of different scholars. And then you are the coach, the organiser of all this material. So you organise it all, you orchestrate it all, you put it all together. And you probably don't want to say, I think that, because that sounds like unsupported, subjective, your own views. But you do want to say something like, having considered, particularly in the conclusion or near the end, having considered the different viewpoints, it is likely that, or there seems to be considerable support for that. What are your thoughts on this, Wes? Does that sort of help answer the balance question a little bit, the 50-50?
Yep, yeah, I understand that. But still, sometimes when I reflect my own ideas,
yes,
accidentally that coincides with others as well.
Yeah,
that's when I'm struggling.
Yeah, and I think your ideas change over time. So often when you come in, it's very good to humbly admit the limited knowledge that one has. And so if you do heart surgery for the first time, I'm not sure if either of you are, but if you do heart surgery for the first time, you'd want to be 99% learning and 1% offering your own opinions, wouldn't you? But having then put in some time through the 10 or 13 weeks of study, towards the end, you should be able to say, from the study you've done, you've formed a commitment and some ideas that you are now committed to. Rachel, what are your thoughts on balancing your own ideas with the ideas of others in a well-supported, evidence-supported way?
Yeah, I found probably the opposite to Wes. I found I was struggling in first semester with, I was doing spiritual transformation and weighing up, other people's definitions of spiritual transformation, and then expected to come to my own definition. I'm like, how can I, who am I to form an opinion yet? I want to read the whole world about spiritual transformation before I decide. So I found it quite tricky to pin myself down to a definition, to have my own, I guess, like you're saying, come to a supported conclusion kind of thing. I found it difficult to do that, to back myself and to, I guess, where that balance of is or is it my opinion, or have I just reviewed and, discussed and then come to, a supported conclusion? So yeah, I did struggle a bit with that.
Yeah, and I think with spiritual transformation, at the beginning, you're collecting information. You've got a hunch that, the spirit, that means certain things. And then you've got a hunch that the transformation comes about in certain ways through certain processes. And then about halfway through the 10 or 13 weeks, after 5 or 6 weeks, you've now got information from your reading, you've got quotations. I think that's what really strengthens the essay. The more strong scholarly quotations you can put in, the better the essay. And then the next thing, after strong scholars, I think you want a balance. And so some people will be saying, the spirit formation might all come through the Bible, and so it's the word of God. But then you might balance that with others saying it's good also to have an experience of God's presence. And then James K.A. Smith would say it's not just head knowledge that brings you formation, but it's heart knowledge that really forms you, and it's habits that form you. And so you quote James K.A. Smith. And then what you find is that halfway through doing your assignments, or 2/3 through doing your assignments, you then find you've got all this material, but it starts to cluster around different viewpoints. And so you find that you've got 3 or 4 scholars say that it's the Bible and reading the Bible that shapes my formation. And then another 3 or 4 scholars say it's the heart attitude and habits that shape my formation. And then you've got others that say it's the social setting of people around me and who I've got around me that shape it. So you've got these clusters, and a mind map can be useful to gather these clusters. Or if you're a gatherer of words, you've got on maybe 20 pages of notes on the computer or through your notebook, these clusters of ideas, and you can write big headings for the clusters. With a computer file, you can shuffle them around, and so you might save that file, open another one, and cut and paste from one edition. So you might have spiritual formation essay 2A, you save that, and then you make a copy of it, spiritual formation essay 2B, and then you'll totally shuffle that around into the clusters coming together, and you get some sort of flow for the overall structure. So at that point, you'll then start to have a feeling, hey, I've been reading this and studying this now for 3 or 4 weeks or so, and you're starting to think, I think spiritual formation is. And if you have a slightly original view, I encourage you to pursue that a little bit, because one of the things we need is a certain measure of originality and ownership. After all, it's your learning, it's your essay. And it's a bit like learning about wood chopping, but never getting an axe, trying it. You have to own it a bit and try it a bit. And when you take up your views of spiritual formation, that can be useful. You might want to keep a diary and write 3 or 4 pages on your view of spiritual formation. And you might only want to get 1 paragraph out of that, which really summarises what you're thinking at this point. But I think it's important to own it after you gather the information there. So,
yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So as you go through your reading, and so the best scholars that you can read will be really helpful for you, but sometimes they'll be difficult to read because they're from a different country or time period, and so it can be hard to work through. But you'll be gathering information from that. Some people keep on one side of the page or one area. These are the direct quotes from the book, and then over the other side they try and balance it with, these are my ideas based on the direct quotes. Stanley Grenz, who writes books on theology, he used to spend the afternoon one day collecting notes and information, then he'd go to sleep, and then he'd wake up next day, take the dog for a walk, and there'd be ideas coming into his mind because he's been sleeping on these ideas. And sometimes he'd write some notes, other times he'd rush back to his study, and then he'd be writing down the ideas that are forming, which are now partly his own, drawing from the evidence, drawing from scholars, but he's now working through, this is what he now thinks. Because you've asked a very big, important question. How is a person formed? As you're taking a walk with the dog, you might realise formation really is pushing things into place. In ancient times, they might have been talking about clay and forming things in that way. And then in more recent times, we have more of a knowledge of neuroscience and other ways the mind works. So contemporary insights might help us understand how people are forming their commitments and their views. And so you've got ideas starting to come to you. Start to work them through, because it's only through some of these ideas of your own that you'll be able to go on to get the higher grades and be able to be said that you've mastered the subject, you've achieved what is needed. So there's about 3 types of notes that you'll take. One is direct quotes. So I think that's always quite good. You might want to put quotation marks around them. Sometimes you'll find whole chapters or whole books on the internet or on the college library website that you can copy them. Of course, they're not much good for you just as one whole piece. You then might want to cut and paste some key sentences. So you might just find 1, 2 or 3 key sentences on a page. You might cut them and put direct quotes around them, and make sure you remember to put the reference and the page number, because it's so hard to find those again. Although with computer searches, you can sometimes find the page and the reference again. So it's a good idea to add headings along the way, so that you can locate this quote again and look at what theme or idea it's working on. You should use words for the headings that help you search later. So we're doing formation, I mentioned neuroscience, you might have a page or a paragraph on that. You have to be careful and find out whether the lecturers are into neuroscience or not. They may be into Bible, they may be into prayer or worship. You've got to find out what your lecturers are looking forward as well. And then direct quotation should only be used when you're gathering the information, and then later when you want to support something. In your essay, I tend to recommend not using too many direct quotations, mainly paraphrases and thinking through the scholar says. Other scholars and students use more direct quotations than me. My concern with direct quotations is they don't show you thinking, whereas if you're working with the material, that does show you thinking a lot more. Too many direct quotations can interrupt the flow of the essay, which is meant to be your views, your ideas, working with the evidence and the material and showing how you've come to an understanding of what you have. Remember to keep the full details of the source there with every quote you take. Remember too to avoid plagiarism, so using someone else's ideas without the quotation marks around, not showing where it came from, then that is plagiarism, and you could be severely penalised and fail badly for that. However, putting some quotes around it and then working with the material and then discussing it and comparing 3 or 4 different viewpoints that you've gathered, rather than being plagiarism and thrown out, could be called brilliant scholarship, and you could get a lot of pats on the back for what you do. So it's not a huge journey from just unsourced plagiarism through to carefully sourced and detailed analysis and study of the material and thinking it through. The second way to take notes, as I said, is paraphrasing. That's where you summarise in your own words, and that's probably the major thing that you do. And you shouldn't just cut and paste and change a couple of words. You should think through, what is the scholar saying, and then how can I express that in my own words. Another way to go is to summarise. So that's shorter than the big paraphrase. And then another way to go is just to develop your own insights and thoughts. So Wes, how do you feel you go with these different ways of gathering notes, paraphrasing and balancing the notes you gather with your own ideas? And I guess in a paragraph, you often have a mixture of ideas from a few different sources or one main source, and then it develops into your own ideas as well. You might have a first sentence to the paragraph that introduces it, and then you work through, and then the final one draws it together. But how do you feel you go with this process, Wes?
For the last semester, I struggled a bit because of the time. I started everything late, but this semester I'm planning everything and started working out, paraphrasing, and gathering the information to write an essay, the outline, the structure, and everything. If I do that, really that'll be helpful. Last semester also I did that, but I did everything all together in the end of the semester towards during the time of submission of my essays. So in that way, I struggled the last semester, but I hope this time, with the knowledge I gain now and some sort of pre-work, I can overcome that kind of problem.
Yeah. And I think time is the essence in that 13 weeks or so to do a subject is short, and it's a huge task. The advantage of that, of course, is that if you are being pressurised to complete 12 subjects in a master's, it means that within a couple of years you can pick up your master's degree, or 3 years you get your bachelor's degree. Without that, most of us are just pursue interesting things, and it'd take us 20 years to get there. So that sort of time commitment schedule means that you get done what's needed to be done to get your award, but at the same time, you have to use all of that time that you can. And there are usually time guidelines, and I often feel that it's at least 10 hours per week per subject at least.
Yep.
And if it's 4 subjects full time, then that's 40 hours a full time job. And you then need to funnel that into the area you're working on. You can't afford to go too much off into other areas of interest. You can treat yourself with an hour or two of other areas of interest, but that's additional on top, and you can keep that file for later exploring. But really, you then need to get back to the main area you're working on. Rachel, how do you go with gathering this information, putting it together, some from scholars and then some of your own, and balancing time that's needed to put it all together, and family? Yeah.
Yeah, I get a bit stuck at points. Like I just sort of get bogged down in, as I said, doing the reading and trying to synthesize information. But yeah, in general, I enjoy the process and I get there. But yeah, I'm sure I will just improve as I get faster at getting and recording the information. And I think I tell myself, it's just do a draft, like you're saying, and then as you get further through, you're shaping your ideas even more, and and you're finding more evidence, and then you're kind of rethinking the bit you've already written a little bit. So it's like, I think if I need to just do that draft process, whereas I currently kind of sit down as if I'm writing a final, version sort of thing. So yeah, I definitely got some improvements to make there, but I'll get there.
I like that idea of using the draft process, which means that you don't have to put so much time into the introduction. You really can get into the middle of the assignment. You have to have balance in what you do. And so you're talking about spiritual formation. You might want to balance 3 or 4 different approaches to spiritual formation. So you want to put an equal amount of time in, and you might only have 2 or 3 weeks until it's due, and you want to set aside the last 30 to 50% is going to be the editing and redrafting. And so if you've got, say, 3 weeks, you might want to put 1.5 weeks into the final write-up. That only leaves you 1.5 weeks to gather the material and to do all the work. So there's a lot to do in that first 1.5 weeks there. And then you've got to balance that time between, let's say you're going to have 3 different approaches to spiritual formation, that you can do that. But I like that idea of seeing it as a draft, that you're gathering the information for the first week or so, and then you're balancing it between these 3 different approaches. And then you need to make a commitment about halfway through your process, this is what I'm really working on. You can't really afford to change what you're working on when you're halfway through and you've gathered a fair bit of your material at that stage. Yeah. Yeah, good. Yeah, so there's a few different note-taking methods that you can work on, and then there's other resources that you can work on. But let's open it up now to some questions that you might have. Other questions, Wes, on the whole process of tertiary study and writing? And then after that, I might ask Rachel first. Rachel, do you have other questions at all?
Yeah, sorry, baby's just woken up, but husband is checking. Yeah, see if you'll go back down. Thanks, babe. I think I'll be interested to read your notes. I have learned a bit already, but I think I do have questions about gathering the information. Maybe like I didn't really use Google Scholar last time. Is that a good resource? Like on top of the library, you just like can do key searches and that in there. Is that
It can be very good. Sometimes you'll find nothing there.
Okay.
But if you go to Google Scholar and put in, say, spiritual formation and then Bible or experience or other terms, you may be fortunate and find some good resources. Okay. It'll tell you over on the right-hand side of Google Scholar, it'll have whether it's available, and you'll find that 80% of them won't have access for you to the resource. So over on the right-hand side, then you'll have a picture of the resource or a little icon showing that the resource is available. You click on that and you can open it up. On the left-hand side of Google Scholar, you can also put the date range as well. And so if you was to put that date range there, so if is your screen gone to Google, has it? Or is it
still on the notes?
Still
page.
on the notes, yeah. So I've gone to.
But I just had a quick look. Yeah, that's.
Yeah. So if you do that sort of thing with now, let's see, has it gone now to Google Scholar on your screen?
Yes,
yeah. So if you go to Google Scholar and put in spiritual formation, and then often it's good if you can find something else. Can you think of another word, Rachel, that you'd use? Holy Spirit, church, relationship. Is there another word you'd add there as well?
Yeah, well, Holy Spirit was one of the aspects that we.
Yeah. So if you put a Holy Spirit there as well, then that may bring up what you're looking for. And so you can see on the right-hand side, they're saying that you'll be able to see spiritual formation in Christ, Dallas Willard, Journal of Psychology and Theology, 2000. So that looks quite good there. But this one here, it's a book, so you can probably go there and read the first chapter or something of it. This one here is a book. They're saying you might have access to more. So it looks like there's a few resources. And then over on the left-hand side of Google Scholar, we've got the custom range. And so you might put in 2012, so this will be the last 10 years, to 2022, and that'll mean that we can find scholarly resources in the last 10 years. So that can be very useful as well. So certainly I'd gather those. And then if it's a PDF, you can always save them to your computer for a later time. You can save the web address as well. And so you can use that at a later time. So yeah, that's a good resource. And then Wes, how do you go with gathering it all, putting it all together?
Yep.
The questions that you have, Wes.
Yep. While we gather the data from different resources, do you recommend to paraphrase then itself, or collect the data then later on while working for an essay, it's better to paraphrase and write? Which one?
Yeah, I think certainly the first 30% of your time, you're gathering information. I
Right.
also find when my brain slows down a bit in the afternoon, sometimes I switch from writing to gathering information when my brain's a bit slower. And then tomorrow, when I've got this list of resources, then when my brain's fresh, I go to that. And some people have a fresh mind early in the day. Other people have a fresh mind later in the afternoon or in the evening, late at night. So there's hours and hours. So you work out when your mind's working best and when you need to get to the gym or somewhere for doing something different. And then as time goes on, you try and put a balance of material you gather and material that's more your own writing. So I find that when I'm awake at sort of 5, 6 in the morning, then I'm often working on my own writing, but building on material that I'd gathered before. So I just constantly keep working on a bit of gathering, more writing. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. No, sounds good. Yeah, Rachel, other questions you might have?
Nothing comes to mind. I was definitely keen to get some note taking, like tips and things. So I definitely got a few, and I can see some in your notes there as well. So yeah, no, I'm looking forward to applying some of those.
Yes. Now, if you can send an email to me, then as well, you should have my email or Anne's, and then I'll be able to forward the notes to you. So if you send an email to Anne or myself, then you'll have access to the notes, and we'll send the notes out to you, Wes and Rachel. And if other students are interested as well, we can send the notes out to them. Next Thursday or the Thursday after, we will also possibly have a time of looking further at some of these areas. And then 1st of September, 5 p.m, we're going to spend some more time looking at collecting information, writing and referencing. 8th of September, similar time, middle of the day, 1 p.m, we'll look at planning and writing at the essay. 15th of September, more time with planning. 22nd of September, we'll look at how to bring Christian perspectives into the assignment, and then 6th of October, finding scholarly sources, and then Anne Millard is available as well. So we will do what we can to support you along the way. So thank you both there, and yeah, happy to help where we can and support where we can.